welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons, and with me, as always, is Nathan Kwan. And joining us again is Kevin Hahn, as today we are going to be previewing the NBA playoffs. Kevin Hahn, take it away.
All right, so I guess the first series we'll jump into is the Boston versus Chicago series. It's the number 1 seed versus the number 8 seed. Regular season series, they were tied 2-2. And I think Boston, they've been playing really good team basketball under Brad Stevens this season. The Celtics as a team, they were 4th in assists in the league and 7th in scoring. And Isaiah Thomas, he's also been a beast for the Celtics, playing like an MVP candidate, averaging 29 points per game and six assists per game. But the only knock on the Celtics that I have is that this version of the roster, they've never won a playoff series yet, mainly because the guys on the roster are so young. So they don't have the experience that the guys on the Bulls have, particularly Wade and Rondo. An interesting stat that's been floating around is that Dwayne Wade has played more playoff games than the entire Celtics roster combined, which is kind of crazy to think about. That being said, I believe Boston will win the series because they're the much better team. And I think the Bulls will have trouble keeping up with the scoring pace of the Celtics because the Bulls are one of the worst shooting teams in the league. But I think the experience of Wade and Butler in the lineup will probably help the Bulls steal a game or two at home. So in the end, I'm probably taking the Celtics in 6 games.
Yeah, I'm taking the Celtics in 5 games, personally. Well, you do bring up a good point that the Celtics don't have a ton of experience in the playoffs. I do believe that they also have Al Horford on their team, and he actually has a great deal of a playoff experience himself. I mean, obviously not to the extent that Dwayne Wade does, but at the end of the day, like I think in this series, like playoff experience is not while it's important, it's probably going to help him steal at least a game, maybe possibly 2. I just don't see the Chicago Bulls having enough talent to upend the Boston Celtics. Like you said, Isaiah Thomas has been playing like an MVP candidate, borderline like his namesake did in his prime in a way. Even then, and as you said before, the shooting on the Chicago Bulls is just so hit or miss. Really, it's just Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade, and as great as Dwayne Wade has been this season and has really surprised me, personally, just because like I thought like I felt like he had been sort of like declining in he'd been declining a lot in production, and I thought he was just like already succumbing to old age. And has really turned it around this season. I still don't think he's going to be near enough now to upend it. I mean, that being said, he was able to get his sweet revenge on Pat Riley and the Miami Heat by bumping them out of the playoffs this year. Outside of that, they also have to, I guess, like watch out for Rajon Rondo and make sure that he doesn't mess up the team chemistry like he did for the Mavericks when they were in the playoffs. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's just Celtics have too much firepower to really get challenged that badly by the Chicago Bulls this year.
Yeah, a lot of NBA fans really wanted Miami to get that 8th seed. They're young up and coming team. Chicago's kind of been this team that's backed into the playoffs. They have that situation where they have a lot of veterans and they also have young players, and the direction of that team from management wasn't really clear throughout the year. But I think this is a chance the Bulls could win a couple games in this series. I think they have a big rebounding edge. They're number 3 in the league in rebounding. Boston has struggled in that department at times this year, and defensively, Chicago, for the most part, has been pretty solid this year. And so their formula to win is going to have to be to keep the score low, because they, as you guys have mentioned, they've struggled to score in spurts this year. They've been really inconsistent. They beat the Cavaliers 4 times, but then they also lost the Knicks 3 times. And so the team is just so up and down. In the end, I think Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley, and there's just too much firepower on that Celtics team. So I'm going to go Boston in 6.
All right, let's move on to the next series. The 4th seed Washington Wizards versus the 5th seed Atlanta Hawks. During the regular season, the Wizards led 3-1. And I'm really high on the Wizards this season. So I'm going to say the Wizards take this series in 5 games. And Atlanta, to me, as a team, they're very inconsistent because They play like the best team in the league one night and complete garbage the next night. So this is also Dennis Schroeder's first time leading a team in the playoffs. So he's going to have to step up for the Hawks to have a chance. And the Wizards probably have the two best offensive players in this series, in John Wall and Bradley Beal. John Wall has been playing like an MVP candidate all season, averaging 23 points and 11 assists. And Bradley Beal is having a career year as well, averaging 23 points and 3 3-pointers a game. And to be frank, I don't think the Hawks really have anyone who can stop John Wall. And the Hawks are also not a great offensive team, ranking 22nd in the league in points scored per game. So I think they'll have trouble keeping up with Washington's pace this series. So in the end, I say Wizards in 5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Wizards in 6. As you pointed out, Bradley Beal and John Wall have both been just incredible and offered a great 1-2 punch in the backcourt. But that being said, I will say that as inconsistent as Atlanta has been, while I wouldn't say Washington has been near as inconsistent, Washington has also struggled with like trying to find some consistency. I mean, they made some great trades at the deadline, getting Bogan Bogdanovic to help strengthen that bench and really provide a very good scoring punch from there. Just say that Otto Porter has kind of struggled a bit since the trade deadline. He was pretty efficient with his scoring, but since then he's kind of fallen a little bit. And Marcin Gortat as their center has kind of shown his age a little bit, but I mean he's still averaging a double-double. As was pointed out by Kevin, Atlanta is far too inconsistent themselves to really pull off anything. I mean they do have some playoff experience with obviously like Paul Millsap and Dwight Howard, but Hawks don't really have the firepower to get to even keep up with this Washington Wizards team.
Yeah, so I think if you have no rooting interest and you just want to watch a good series of close games, this might be it. So these two teams in their 4 games, they played 2 that went down to the wire, and they're teams that played a lot of close games throughout the year. Atlanta's actually one of those teams that overachieved, kind of like the Rangers did last year. So they had actually a negative 70 point differential, which is the worst point differential among playoff teams. And they were really there in the playoffs as a number 5 seed because they were really good in close games down the stretch. And Washington was one of the best at close games down the stretch as well. And so I think these teams are very evenly matched in terms of their ability to win close games. But in terms of the overall matchup, Atlanta, as you guys have mentioned, has struggled offensively at times this year. Paul Millsap, Dennis Schroeder. I think that real X factor for them offensively is Tim Hardaway Jr. I think when he is on and he's making big baskets for them, it really opens up the offense for the rest of the guys. I think inside is going to be an interesting matchup with Dwight Howard against Marcin Gortat. Those are 2 former teammates with the Orlando Magic. But in the end, I think Washington's they're going to play the series at too high a pace. And Atlanta's not going to be able to keep up. So I'm going to go Washington in 6.
All right, moving on to the next series, the number 3 seeded Toronto Raptors versus the number 6 seed Milwaukee Bucks. During the regular season, the Raptors led the series 3-1, and I'm going to take the Raptors in 5 games. The Raptors have been on fire since March, going 12-2 to close out the season. But Kyle Lowry is still recovering from a wrist injury, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects their offense against the Bucks, who are a pretty good defensive team. I just want to say Giannis Antetokounmpo, he's having an all-around great year, and he's probably a lock to win the Most Improved Player award. He's leading the Bucks in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, which has only been done 4 other times in NBA history. But the Bucks as a whole, I don't think they really have a chance against a very deep Raptors team. And they don't really have an answer defensively for DeMar DeRozan. And also the Bucks overall, they're a poor rebounding team, the 2nd worst in the league. So I think they'll struggle on that end as well, especially with Ibaka down low for the Raptors. So in the end, I say the Raptors close out the series in 5 games.
Yeah, I go Toronto in 5 as well. I mean, kudos to this Bucks team, and it's specifically Giannis Antetokounmpo. I mean, as you pointed out, he's leading this team in pretty much every category. But even more shocking is that he's leading. He's in the top 20 in the NBA in all those categories as well. So not only is he just like the leader of this Milwaukee Bucks team, but he's one of the best in the NBA, just period. And honestly, had it been any other year, like Giannis would be considered a very, very, very strong MVP candidate, if not like top three. But unfortunately for him, he's got to contend with people like James Harden and Russell Westbrook and LeBron James. But outside of that, there's really just not enough depth on this Bucks team to really contend with the Toronto Raptors. I mean, being led by that backcourt of Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, I just don't see them being able to keep up with those two. And this is arguably a better Toronto team than the one that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. And I mean, granted, while I will say that like there's probably better teams in the East this year than there was last year, it's going to be interesting to see how far this Toronto team can go, especially if they end up playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers again this year in the next round. But I'll leave that for later, and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth too soon. But yeah, Toronto in 5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Toronto in 5 as well. I think, as you mentioned, this Toronto team is actually the only Eastern Conference team that ranks in the top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. And so their record is kind of misleading. That they're third in the East. As you mentioned, Kyle Lowry, his wrist injury had really prevented that team from taking off and working on their overall team chemistry. Because I think when you bring in two guys that fit into your rotation during the trade deadline, there's going to be a time where you need to adjust, and see Lowry being out. I think that hurt them a little bit. But in terms of this series, I think Milwaukee has had a great year. Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think, will win the most improved player of the year. But I think really this team losing Jabari Parker in February, I think hurts their chances here. Them being a young team, Parker going out with a knee injury, another devastating blow for them. But I think Chris Middleton and Greg Monroe they've been veterans, and so this is their return to the playoffs after a couple of years. And so I think they'll play well enough to win one game. But I think Toronto, as you guys mentioned, too deep, too good offensively and defensively, and they're going to want to rest up for a potential matchup with Cleveland in the second round. So I think they take this in 5.
All right, let's move on to the next series. The number 2 seeded defending champion Cleveland Cavaliers versus the number 7 seeded Indiana Pacers. So the Cleveland led the season series 3-1. And the hot topic right now is that the Cavs have been struggling since the All-Star break, going 12-15 to close out the season. And their lackluster defense has been the story all season, and it was really brought to light when the Cavs blew a 28-point lead to the Hawks one game and lost in overtime. However, I think the Cavs will play up to their championship form in the playoffs. They still have the best player in the world in LeBron James, and they recently improved their depth with the addition of Darren Williams as a backup point guard. So I think the Cavs should have no problems with this Pacers team in the first round, but Paul George is really the X factor for the Pacers, and he could probably single-handedly win a game or two for the Pacers. But I don't see Indiana getting out of the first round, so I will say Cavs win the series in 5 games.
Yeah, I'm going Cavs in 5 as well. Again, like you said, I mean, LeBron James is arguably the best player in the world right now, and playoff LeBron James is nearly unstoppable at this point. But I mean, that being said, like there seems to be some dysfunction on this Cleveland team, with LeBron voicing his concerns quite a few times. And I mean, granted, like I think a lot of it has been blown out of proportion. But I mean, at the same time, like, I mean, it's hard to ignore the fact that LeBron and the rest of the team has to just focus their attention on the court and just trying to play one game at a time. I mean, obviously, besides LeBron, you have Kyrie and Kevin Love, who've been playing decently well, although both, I believe, have been struggling with injuries this season. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they try to keep them at least somewhat healthy for the rest of the year. I think the bigger X factor for the Cleveland Cavaliers going down the stretch, I mean, outside of the obvious Brits, is going to be Kyle Korver, who they added at the trade deadline. More so, I think, than arguably Deron Williams, although Deron Williams had a great 4-point play against the Miami Heat to help Cleveland win a game. But at the end of the day, I think Kyle Korver is maybe the difference for this Cleveland Cavaliers team, not just this round, but in the future rounds. I will say though that as you mentioned, Paul George really is the type of player that who could help steal the game against this Cleveland team. I mean, he's just that good. But I mean, the problem being is that the team that surrounds Paul George is just not that good. I remember watching a game between Pacers and the Wizards and just seeing how this team would just struggle the moment that Paul George was no longer on the court. They just don't have enough scorers on the team, and their defense is pretty bad to watch, honestly. So yeah, I'm going to go Cleveland in 5. Indiana just doesn't. They don't have enough to really like make this too much of a series.
Yeah, so this is a matchup, in my opinion, between two teams that were rather disappointing this year. Cleveland, obviously the defending champ, they've looked bad defensively for a lot of the year. They finished the year actually 20th in points allowed, which is horrific for a team that went all the way and won it all last year. Indiana came into the year, and I thought that team had a solid shot at being a top 4 seed, but they've been underwhelming. They haven't really integrated what Nate McMillan has wanted to run with veterans and their combination of good young players there. I watched the highlights of the game they played on April 2nd, and Cleveland won, but it was a double overtime game, back and forth. I think LeBron James and Paul George is going to be the matchup to watch, obviously. This is in the first round, probably the top matchup between those two guys. I think Indiana has enough talent to win couple games. So Jeff Teague, I like Miles Turner out of UT. He's developed his game very nicely this year, and CJ Miles is a good 3-point shooter that can get hot at any times. And I think Cleveland, you are what your record says you are, and I don't think that there's just a switch you magically turn on and suddenly you become a good defensive team once the playoffs start. Like the habits that they've had throughout the second half, where they've been so horrible defensively in stretches, that doesn't just magically go away now that the playoffs have started. So, I mean, I think they're going to win the series. I have them winning in 6.
All right, so let's move on to the Western Conference, starting with the 1st seed Golden State Warriors versus the 8th seed Portland Trailblazers. The Warriors led the season series 4-0, and I think that's going to be reflective of this series as well. I think it's going to be a sweep for the Warriors. But the Blazers, they went on an impressive 18-8 run after the All-Star break to close out the season. And in that stretch, they went from pretty much an average offensive team to almost top 5 in the league. And I think that was heavily influenced by the addition of Jusuf Nurkic to the roster. Ever since Nurkic arrived to Portland, they've been taking more shots in the paint and less shots from outside. And as a result, those shots have been a higher quality, as they've been leading the league in 3-point percentage during that stretch. But unfortunately for the Blazers, they're facing a Golden State Warriors team in the first round, which is arguably one of the greatest offensive teams ever assembled in the history of the NBA. And the Warriors also ended the season on a hot streak, winning 15 of their last 16 games. And the scary part is they did it without Kevin Durant for the most part. So I don't think the Blazers will have enough firepower to keep up with the Warriors offense in this series. So I'm going to say the Warriors will sweep.
To me, it's going to be close to a sweep. I have the Warriors in 5. I think there's a real strong chance that maybe the Trailblazers steal a game, probably when they're playing in Portland. I mean, definitely kudos to the Trailblazers for the torrid stretch towards the end of the season and being able to bump off the Denver Nuggets, who they were able to get Jusuf Nurkic from. So talk about a trade really backfiring, especially for that Nuggets team that really didn't get that much in return. That being said, I mean they do have a strong team, or at least a strong backcourt with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard leading the charge with their 3-point percentage, as well as being able to having an improved mid-range game due to Jusuf Nurkic's presence down low in the post. But really, again, as you said, outside of that, it's just not nearly enough to keep up with this Golden State Warriors team that's trying to get back on track, I guess, in a way, from their 2015 heights. I mean, Steph Curry has really picked things back up. Draymond Green is Draymond Green. And I mean, Klay Thompson's also just, I mean, he's returned to his form as well if he's ever lost it at any point. So I say Golden State in 5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Golden State in 5. So I'm not going to make too much of the regular season sweep. Those games all went before the Blazers went on their run and they got Yusuf Nurkic. And as Kevin mentioned, they really changed their offense and they've been a lot better. I think Nurkic, his status for this series is a question mark. He missed final 8 games of the regular season, and the Blazers say he's going to be ready for the playoffs, but his effectiveness with that fractured left leg, it's going to be interesting to watch. I think for Golden State, Kevin Durant getting back to form. So he's played 3 games since coming back from that injury, and the Warriors obviously are going to need him 100% if they want to win the NBA title this year. But in the end, I see the Blazers getting 1 game at home with Damian Lillard being motivated to win 1 against his hometown team, and Nurkic providing some problems for the Golden State Warriors down low, but Golden State, I think, breezes by without too much problem. So I have them in 5.
All right, let's move on to the next series. The number 4 seeded LA Clippers versus the number 5 seeded Utah Jazz. The Clippers led the season series 3-1, but I think this is probably going to be the most interesting first round matchup and the only one that is most likely going to go to 7 games. The good news for the Clippers is that finally Chris Paul and Blake Griffin are both healthy for this playoff series, but the bad news is if they don't get out of the first round, they will likely blow up the team during the offseason. So this is most likely the Clippers' last chance together to potentially get to the conference finals and maybe win a championship. But the Clippers will be facing a very scary Jazz team with Rudy Gobert leading the way at the center spot. Gobert led the league this season in blocks with 2.6 per game, and he's a big reason why the Jazz is the best defensive team in the league. Gordon Hayward has also been playing out of his mind, averaging 22 points a game, and he was selected to be an All-Star this year. Well-deserved. An interesting matchup to see will be DeAndre Jordan versus Rudy Gobert down low. It'll also be interesting to see if the Jazz defense can contain the Clippers' dynamic offense, where they have a lot of different scoring options, both outside and inside. But in the end, I think it'll be a close series, but I think the Clippers will win in 7 games. They know this is probably their last chance with this team to potentially win a championship, and I think that added pressure will put them over the edge.
Yeah, I'm going to go Clippers in 7 as well. I mean, this is like you said, this is really kind of the Clippers' last stand to finally make it over the hump and actually make it to the Western Conference Finals, let alone try to make it to the NBA Finals. I mean, it's kind of strange to think about how this LA Clippers team has turned into sort of specifically the team that revolves around Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan. Blake Griffin himself has kind of become a bit of an afterthought for this team. A lot of it due to injuries, but I mean, also a lot of it has to do with just how good Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan have been. I mean, Chris Paul, I mean, he's known as one of the best assist makers in the league, but I mean, he's also a great perimeter defender. I think he's like supposed to be like top 10 in that category. And I mean, DeAndre Jordan, I mean, as a Mavs fan, I should know DeAndre Jordan has been tops in the league in rebounding and interior defense. So I mean, he's been absolutely phenomenal for that team, and has pretty much turned into what, as a Mavs fan, I was expecting him to probably become, which is a pretty much a star in this league. But that being said, they are going against a very strong Utah Jazz team with Rudy Gobert, who's developed as well into his own right as one of the best centers in the league, or at least in the Western Conference. I mean, Gordon Hayward, as their leading scorer and pretty much a bona fide leader of this team, has been phenomenal. Playing out of his mind, as you said, scoring at a very decent clip and a very efficient clip as well. I mean, but the big problem I think for this Utah Jazz team is that they still are having a very inconsistent play from the point guard position. They only have, I think, the George Hill really running it, which is good, but not necessarily great. But I still think that 1-2 punch of Gordon Hayward and Rudy Gobert is going to be enough to make this series very interesting and to stretch it out to 7 games. But I still say the Clippers.
Yeah, I would have actually picked Utah 3 weeks ago when the Jazz had home court advantage and the Clippers really looked like a mess. But the way LA finished the season was impressive to me. I think, as Kevin mentioned, they know this is their last shot at getting to the conference finals. And they really played well down the stretch to get that home court advantage in the first round. As you guys have already mentioned, it's going to be a matchup between one of the top 10 offenses in the league against the best defensive team in the league in Utah. And I think playoff experience is going to play a big role. Obviously, LA is very battle tested. Utah has a lot of young guys that have never been there before. They do have some veterans that they brought in Boris Diaw and Joe Johnson, and they've been big for them this year in elevating that team to a top 5 team in the Western Conference. But in the end, I think there's just going to be too much firepower on the Clippers, and Blake Griffin inside, I think, poses a problem for Utah defensively. And Chris Paul against George Hill. George Hill has had a heck of a year, but I think that's advantage Clippers. So I'm going to go LA in 6. I think Quinn Snyder's team, if they can keep that team together, is going to be very good in the years to come. But I think they're just not ready for a playoff series victory at this point.
All right, moving on to the series that we've all been waiting for, the number 3 seeded Houston Rockets versus the number 6 seeded Oklahoma City Thunder. I think this is definitely the most hyped up first round matchup. 2 leading MVP candidates and former teammates in Harden and Westbrook battling it out in the first round. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this series plays out. James Harden, he's been having a historically great offensive season at the point guard position for the Rockets. But he's had a history of poor shooting performances in the playoffs. But I think that the Rockets, they have so many offensive weapons on their team that there's less pressure on Harden to score or to even show up for every game. Even if Harden has an off night, you can give it to either Ryan Anderson, Eric Gordon, Trevor Ariza, Lou Williams, and they can all get hot and hit a bunch of threes and bring the Rockets back in the game. On the other hand, the Thunder, they don't have many scoring options aside from Russell Westbrook and maybe Enes Kanter. However, you can't count the Thunder out simply because they have Mr. Triple-Double on their team. Westbrook could single-handedly take over the game and will the Thunder to a few wins. But in the end, I don't think that'll be enough in a 7-game series. So I will say the Rockets take this series in 6 games.
I'm going Rockets in 5. No, I'm going to go Rockets in 6. As has been pointed out, this Rockets team has just so many weapons beyond just James Harden. And I mean, granted, like James Harden gets lambasted for his supposed lack of defense, and I think that's really unfair, especially just like considering like how good he's been on the offensive end and like morphing into like a top like point guard in the league. And I think that's what's really helped has been like the fact that he's actually has a supporting cast around him that fits well with the style of play that they want. And I mean, I know we made fun of D'Antoni coming into the season, but I mean, he's really helped unleash James Harden and helped him sort of like reach his full potential as like arguably, I would say, the NBA MVP this year. That being said, like the reason that it's arguable is because of the person he's going to be facing off against in a former teammate called Russell Westbrook, who averaged a triple-double on this team. I mean, now granted, and not to take away from what Russell Westbrook did this year, but I mean, like considering that he's pretty much far and away the best player on that team, and pretty much had to do almost everything. Well, not to take away from the rest of the other players on the Oklahoma City team, like pretty much did everything by himself. He still needs help. And I mean, like, while the Thunder were decent down the stretch, I mean, they did have losses to teams that I felt were kind of inexplicable. And not only were they just like close losses, but they would actually have games where they would get blown out, like against the Dallas Mavericks, which was weird to watch. But I mean, definitely, I mean, this is definitely as Kevin said, the most hyped series in the first round this year. I mean, and honestly, a lot of it has to do with just the dueling stories going in between the two dueling MVP candidates.
As the great American philosopher Terrell Owens said, "Get your popcorn ready." I think that's going to be the series is going to be fun. So, James Harden against Russell Westbrook. I think it's going to be amazing to watch those two. As a Rockets fan, as a Houston sports fan in general, I am a little scared So the Rockets, when they've struggled this year, they've been killed on the boards on the inside. And I think Oklahoma City, this is a recipe for disaster for the Rockets. They're the number one team in the league in rebounding. And inside, Steven Adams, Enes Kanter, and Taj Gibson, who they got from the Bulls on the trade deadline, can really pose the problem. I think the Rockets really need Nene and Clint Capella to play well. They've been good throughout this year at splitting time at that center position, and they're going to be huge. I think even more so than the three-point shooters for the Rockets in this series. They cannot get killed on the boards on the inside and give up offensive rebounds left and right, because when they do that, it really puts the emphasis on the Rockets to make so many three-pointers, and that's a lot of pressure to put on your shooters when you're giving up second and third chance opportunities every time on the court. However, I'm going to take the Rockets to win. I just think James Harden, we'll talk about in a little bit, has matured this year in that he knows he needs to trust his teammates for this team to win. And Andre Roberson of the Thunder actually has defended Harden one-on-one actually pretty well this year. I think their stats that the only team that defends Harden better than Oklahoma City is Golden State. And so he's responded by just spreading the ball around to the litany of three-point shooters that he has. And I think that maturation of his game is what's going to take the Rockets team into the second round. As you guys mentioned, Eric Gordon, Lou Williams, Ryan Anderson, Trevor Ariza. There's so many shooters on this team, and Harden knows he doesn't have to do this himself. And Oklahoma City, they really just depend so much on Russell Westbrook. And I think Patrick Beverley has been ready for this matchup for years, ever since they last matched up a couple of years ago. And I think he'll play well against Westbrook and frustrate him at times. So in the end, I am a little bit scared of the inside presence of Oklahoma City and the rebounding, but I'm going to take the Rockets to win in 6 games, kind of because I have to, because they're my hometown team, and I want to hope that they do well, but also because I think they're the better team.
All right, moving on to our last first-round matchup, the second-seeded San Antonio Spurs versus the seventh-seeded Memphis Grizzlies. The season series was tied 2-2. And I think this is also a very interesting first-round matchup, which will pit two of the best defensive teams in the league. And the matchup between the Gasol brothers will be interesting as well, and because I think this is the first time they face each other in the playoffs, actually. But the problem with Memphis is that they're not a very good offensive team, ranking second and the last in the league in points scored per game. And they also don't really have a go-to scorer who they can rely on to get them a bucket in crunch time. On the other hand, the Spurs have a scorer like that, and his name is Kawhi Leonard. He's averaging almost 26 points a game this year, and he's turned into a weapon offensively for the Spurs. And this is kind of crazy to think about because he's also a leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year. So he's doing it on both ends of the floor. On top of that, the Spurs still pass the ball very well, obviously. They play extremely well team basketball under Coach Pop's system, and they have a lot of experience getting it done in the playoffs. So in the end, I'll say the Spurs take this series in 5 games.
Yeah, I'm going Spurs in 6. I mean, this is sort of a rematch of the 2011 playoffs where the Memphis Grizzlies ended up upseeding the number 1 seeded Spurs. Now, granted, that Memphis team had a much younger Zach Randolph and younger Marc Gasol. I mean, I do think that matchup between the Gasol brothers is going to be very interesting. I mean, like another fun fact, obviously, is like how Pau Gasol himself is a former Memphis Grizzly, but although they never ended up playing on the same team in the NBA, fortunately, since like the fact of the matter is that like the Lakers had to trade Marc Gasol in order to get Pau Gasol in order to win the NBA championship. So that's beside the point. Like as you said, I mean Kawhi Leonard has morphed into arguably one of the best two-way players in the NBA, and therefore arguably a candidate for MVP, which I feel like we've almost been saying like for every series in the playoffs. But I mean, I think Kawhi Leonard might be too much. I mean, I know LaMarcus Aldridge has struggled with injury down the stretch, especially since like I think they discovered that he might have somewhat of a medical condition that could really negatively affect him going forward now. But I think he's able to hold up against Zach Randolph. Although, I mean, like Zach Randolph has, I mean, as great as he was like 5 years ago, he's really tailed off because due to just, I mean, obviously the rigors of age. And like Mike Conley has, I mean, he himself has struggled through injury. Although he's been pretty good this year. I mean, and as you said, like they really are missing having a primary scorer for this team. I mean, I think they were hoping that not only would Mike Conley morph into it, but they were hoping that at least Chandler Parsons could be a consistent offensive player. But the only thing offensive about him is his ability to stay on the court, unfortunately. So unfortunately for him, I say this game goes to 6, but I still say that San Antonio wins this relatively easily.
Yeah, if you'd like offense, don't watch the series. It's going to be a grind. As Kevin mentioned, these are the two of the best defensive teams in the league, and I would be surprised if more than 2 games gets into the hundreds. I think it's going to be a series in the 80s and 90s. But as you guys mentioned, Kawhi Leonard has turned into a monster offensively, in addition to his defensive prowess. San Antonio's bench is going to be key in the series. They were the best bench in the league against every other team except Memphis. They really struggled against the Grizzlies. And so that crew of Patty Mills, Manu Ginobili, David Lee, Jonathan Simmons, how well they'll play is obviously going to determine how far this team goes in the Western Conference. Their starters outside of Leonard, Gasol has had a good year, but LaMarcus Aldridge, I think at this point, he might be declining. He was very inconsistent at times this year for them. And obviously Tony Parker is getting way up there in age. So I think the Grizzlies just don't have enough scoring in this series. Mike Conley, as you guys have mentioned, has been in and out of lineup. And outside of him, the Grizzlies just don't have a consistent scorer other than Marc Gasol. Zach Randolph's coming off the bench at this point, and his impact on games is a lot less than he used to have. So Spurs, I feel, are not that good offensively, but they're certainly more consistent than the Grizzlies, who are one of the worst in the league. So I see San Antonio winning this in 5 games.
All right, let's go through our NBA awards picks for this year. Starting off with Rookie of the Year, I have Dario Saric winning this award. I think it comes down to either Saric, Joel Embiid, and Malcolm Brogdon. But Embiid has only been playing 31 games, so I don't think he really played enough games to qualify. And ever since Embiid went down, Saric has been leading the rookies in scoring with 13 points per game, and he's been playing really well for the Sixers. So I'm going to give this one to Dario Saric.
I think Sarge probably wins this award now, but that being said, I think Embiid deserves to have more consideration than he ended up having. I mean, I know he only played for 31 games, but I mean, you just look at the stats that he put up during that time, and like he averaged 20.2 points and 7.8 rebounds, as well as 2.5 blocks per game during that 31 game stretch. While that might not come across as like necessarily the greatest thing, he only did that with 25 minutes per game, which is incredible. Most NBA veterans can't do that in 25 minutes, but he was able to do that. And I mean, that ranks up there with some of the NBA greats in terms of best rookie seasons ever. It's just unfortunately just the 31 games I think is going to be the biggest thing that prevents him from getting more consideration as Rookie of the Year. But that being said, I think Dario Saric is a worthy winner for this award. I mean, you have, some other candidates that might might steal some votes, or like Jaylen Brown or something like that. But really, it's been kind of a weak year for NBA rookies outside of those 2 Philadelphia 76ers. While I think Dario Saric wins this, I think Joel Embiid should have won the NBA Rookie Award this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go Malcolm Brogdon. So I actually think that Embiid and Saric being on the same team might actually split the Philadelphia vote. I'm going to go for Brogdon. I think he's only averaged 10 points a game, which would be the lowest ever for a Rookie of the Year. But as Nathan mentioned, it's been a down year for the rookies in terms of their impact. And I think Brogdon has become a very valuable piece on a Milwaukee Bucks playoff team. Coming off the bench, he's shooting 45%, and he's really been an impact player for that team. And he's been playing down the stretch in games and crunch time, and he's fit in well into Jason Kidd's system. So I'm going to go Brogdon.
All right, let's move on to our Coach of the Year picks. I'm going with Mike D'Antoni. So he took an 8-seeded Rockets team last year, struggling to make the playoffs, and turned them into a top 3 team in the league. The Rockets had one of the best offensive seasons in their history. Granted, Rockets had chemistry issues last year with Dwight in the locker room, and Harden didn't really have a great year. But like Nathan mentioned earlier, D'Antoni's offense this year really helped unleash James Harden's potential offensively, and he's been recording historic numbers as a result. And I think the Rockets really outperformed everyone's expectations this year. and they've really been the surprise story of the NBA. So I'm going to go with Mike D'Antoni.
I'm going to go D'Antoni as well, just to sort of like atone for me making fun of him so much prior to this season. I mean, I honestly thought that this hire would be a huge bust and it would be a waste of James Harden's prime years. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's really helped turn this team around in terms of being able to unleash the offensive potential of James Harden, as well as just helping to construct this team of at first like what a lot of people thought were misfits, but basically they all carried together one specific trait, which is being great 3-point shooters. And because of that, he's assembled one of the best offensive teams in the league. That being said, like I at least want to bring up one other person, which is like obviously Brad Stevens from Boston Celtics, who I think will also deserve some consideration. In such a short period of time, he's helped turn this Boston Celtics team that had been struggling to do anything ever since the heyday of the big three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. But he helped turn this team around, the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, in a very strong year for teams in that conference. And really, he's helped Isaiah Thomas become one of the best scorers in the league, as well as just all around putting together a very strong team that should be scary for years to come, especially if they again get the number one seed this year, which is insane to think about. I mean, that's obviously not to further go away from talking about Brad Stevens, but I mean that Brooklyn trade is going to go down as one of the worst of all time. But yeah, I still say D'Antoni.
I'm going to go D'Antoni as well. I'm going to go honorable mention, as you said, to Brad Stevens, as well as Greg Popovich. Year in and year out, he turns out 60-win teams. And this year, after Tim Duncan, he's turned Kawhi Leonard into a monster. Also, honorable mention to Scott Brooks, who's done very well in Washington. They got 8 more wins than they got last year. And Otto Porter and Kelly Oubre have really developed into consistent scorers under him. But the winner is Mike D'Antoni. As you guys have already mentioned, the Rockets were picked anywhere from 8th to 10th this year. When the hire was announced, the fan base was really not happy. They wanted a defensive guy like a Frank Vogel to come in and change the culture because the Rockets were so bad defensively last year. But Daryl Morey, credit him and Leslie Alexander, the owner, for just strengthening a strength and adding an offensive guy and surrounding James Harden with the litany of shooters, and has made the Rockets one of the best offensive teams in NBA history, the best at shooting threes. And so for turning around a team that the city was really down on after 41-41 last year into a legitimate NBA title contender, I'm going to take Mike D'Antoni.
All right, moving on to our Defensive Player of the Year picks. I have Rudy Gobert winning this award because he led the league in block shots and he helped make the Utah Jazz the best defensive team in the league. The other two players in this conversation are Draymond Green and Kawhi Leonard, but I really feel this is Gobert's year, and his presence down low really has such a huge impact for the Jazz. For Kawhi Leonard, I think there's going to be some voters fatigue because he won this award twice already, and I feel like Draymond Green, he's going to get snubbed again. And the argument for Draymond Green is that he guards all the positions 1 through 5, where Gobert only guards the center spot. But I think Gobert's impact down low just can't be ignored this season. And he's just launched the Jazz into a really good defense. So I'm going to go with Rudy Gobert.
I mean, it's going to be real close between Gobert and Draymond Green. I mean, Draymond Green arguably should have won it by now. Although, I mean, like Kawhi Leonard has been a worthy winner for the past 2 years. But I mean, personally, if I had a vote, I would vote for Draymond Green, just because, I mean, not only does he guard almost all the positions for that team, but I mean, like you look past Draymond Green and like who else are you going to rely on as a defensive player? I mean, Klay Thompson is good, but not necessarily tops in the league. And I mean, Steph Curry, I mean, like he's above average, and I wouldn't exactly go so far as to say he's soft or anything, as a lot of people have been saying, but I mean, he's not exactly a shutdown defender. I mean, the only shutdown defender they have on that team is Draymond Green, and yet they still have one of the better defensive teams in the league right now, especially even though they lack any sort of interior presence As you pointed out, I mean, like Rudy Gobert is the big reason why this Utah Jazz team is the best defensive team in the league. And so, I mean, like I would say, like he's a very worthy winner. I think he's probably the likely winner, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think Draymond Green needs to be recognized at some point. And like you said, Draymond Green is going to feel snubbed again, and I'd say rightfully so. I personally think Draymond Green should win.
I'm going to go the Stifle Tower. I'm going to go Rudy Gobert. The best defensive player on the best defensive team. I always go for should be most deserving of winning the award, and Gobert has anchored a Utah Jazz team that is the best defensively in the league.
All right, moving on to our Sixth Man of the Year picks. I think it's safe to say Houston Rockets going to win this award. It's going to come down to either Eric Gordon or Lou Williams. But in the end, I'm going to have to pick Eric Gordon just because he's having a comeback year this year. He's averaging 16 points per game, which is less than what Lou Williams is averaging, which is around 17 and a half. But Eric Gordon hasn't looked this good ever since his LA Clipper days. And he's been shooting the three ball extremely well and efficiently for the Rockets this season. And on top of that, he won the three-point contest during the All-Star game this year. So I think the narrative is there for Eric Gordon to win this award. So Eric Gordon is my pick.
Yeah, I'm going Eric Gordon as well. I think another person that deserves some recognition is Bojan Bogdanovic of the Washington Wizards. I mean, again, like I said, he's really helped stabilize that bench for the Washington Wizards, and I mean, a lot of their NBA playoff run is going to rest on like how good Bogdanovic can be. But I mean, at the end of the day, that was only for half a season. While Eric Gordon has been the second best player, I would say the second best player on one of the best teams in the NBA for the longest time, and he's doing that by coming off the bench. And like you said, I mean, he hasn't looked this good since his LA Clippers days, and before that trade, Chris Paul. I mean, Eric Gordon, and it's been nice to see Eric Gordon turn it around. I mean, I know he's been struggling with injuries, and that's been the big reason why he hasn't been up to form to those times with the Clippers. But I mean, him winning the NBA three-point contest and just the general work he's been doing this year has really helped resuscitate his career, and hopefully he's able to continue it in the playoffs and for years to come as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go Eric Gordon as well. I think honorable mention to Andre Iguodala of the Golden State Warriors. He doesn't have the most flashy stats, but his impact on that team coming off the bench and guarding multiple positions, being a veteran leader, hitting three-point shots, obviously, grabbing rebounds. I think it's not always in the stats, and I think Iguodala's impact on the Warriors is huge. Also, Zach Randolph, this is the first year he's come off the bench for the Grizzlies, and he's been good in that role for them. And also James Johnson of the Miami Heat. He 30-year-old veteran, Eric Spoelstra, has done something with him that's rejuvenated his career, and he was a big part of that team that almost got the 8th seed after that horrific start. But Gordon, I think, clear favorite, and I think he should win. He averages 16 points a game, but his impact on the game when he comes in, he opens up the floor for James Harden and the Rockets, and he can hit threes from any spot on the floor. And as you guys mentioned, he hasn't looked this good in a long time. And he was signed to a relatively cheap contract this past offseason. There weren't too many suitors for his services. And I think if he were to be a free agent again, I think that'd be a different story this offseason. So I'm going to go Gordon.
All right, moving on to our Most Improved Player Award. I'm going to pick Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. I think this is pretty much a lock. He's improved in all statistical categories, and like I mentioned before, he led his team in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. So I think he's going to run away with this award. And really, we're seeing a superstar in the making with Giannis. He's going to win a lot of All-Star appearances in the future. But honorable mention to Devin Booker. He's one of the youngest players ever to score 70 points a game against the Celtics, and he's been looking really good for the Phoenix Suns. But I think Giannis is going to win this award.
Yeah, I go Giannis. I mean, Mark Cuban's going to regret not listening to Don Nelson when Don told him to just like stay at the 13th overall pick and try picking Giannis. But that being said, I mean, Giannis, like Kevin said, this is a lock. Even though this is a year where we've seen a lot of players sort of like come back out of nowhere and make a strong push. But I mean, I think Giannis Antetokounmpo, they want to at least try recognizing this year that he's had. And I mean, again, not only was he leading his team, but he was top 20 in the NBA in a lot of these categories. I would say an honorable mention beyond just like Devin Booker, who he's also looking like an NBA star in the making. I think Rudy Gobert actually has a somewhat of a strong case as well to be considered NBA most improved as well, just for turning into arguably one of the best defensive players in the NBA. But I mean, at the end of the day, Giannis runs away with this.
Yeah, it's going to be the Greek Freak. I think honorable mention for me is Nikola Jokic of the Nuggets. Mike Malone finally started playing him more minutes in like December, and then he discovered he had an absolute stud there. But as you guys mentioned, Giannis has turned from he's a good player on a bad team to oh my God, he's like an every night all-star that puts up crazy numbers, and you forget he's only 22 years old, and so there's no limit for what he can do on the basketball court. And so he's going to be fun to watch for years to come.
All right, moving on to our final and probably most controversial award, the most valuable player. There are really only 4 players in the conversation, in James Harden, Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, and Kawhi Leonard. But really, it's a 2-man race between Harden and Westbrook. But as a Rockets fan, I have to go with James Harden in the end. He's having a historically good year, averaging 29 points per game, 11 assists, and 8 rebounds. And when you compare his stats to Westbrook, they're very close, actually. And I think team record and winning does come into play in the MVP discussion. And Harden has been instrumental in making his teammates around him better and setting up the offense, which has helped lead the Rockets to 55 wins. However, Westbrook has the triple-double narrative going for him, which hasn't been accomplished since Oscar Robertson. So we'll see if the media gets caught up in that narrative. But I think Harden is more deserving of the MVP.
Yeah, I'm going JJ Barea with this award. No, I'm going James Harden. I also think. Let me also at least add, like, Isaiah Thomas deserves to be in the conversation for helping lead the Celtics to best regular season record for the Eastern Conference. But I mean, James Harden, what he's done in just completely flourishing as arguably the best offensive player in the league, and just like someone that night in, night out. Not only does he perform incredibly on his own, but I mean, like, he's helped make his teammates better. I mean, and he's a great facilitator and has really rewarded D'Antoni's faith in turning him into a point guard, and shown that he really is someone that you can build your team around. And I mean, I think he's put this team into a good position of arguably setting everyone and not only making it to the NBA Finals, but possibly winning it. It's going to be very hard for them to do it, and I don't think they do it this year. But I mean, like, he's put them in great position to go do that maybe in the future years. But that being said, I think there is a very strong chance that Russell Westbrook ends up taking this award. I really do think that narrative of averaging a triple-double is going to be very hard for a lot of people to ignore, in spite of the fact that, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, he's the reason that he has been doing, like, had you switch the roles between Russell Westbrook and James Harden and switch the teams that they were playing on, I mean, James Harden, I think, would probably be averaging that too himself. It's just that Russell Westbrook doesn't have the cast of players that James Harden has. And I mean, everyone harps on Harden's defense, even though I would say it's improved a bit this year. And everyone's like, everyone goes crazy over Westbrook's defense. Even though, like, I mean, he's definitely a great perimeter defender and a good one-on-one defender. But I mean, I wouldn't exactly say that the difference is so great that you have to dock Harden, try to and give it to Russell Westbrook. I would give this award to James Harden, but I think there's a very strong possibility that they end up giving Westbrook the NBA MVP. But at the end of the day, I still think James Harden beats Westbrook in the playoffs.
Okay, so for me, defense is not a factor between Westbrook and Harden. They're both bad defensively. There's no way around. You can't say Westbrook is not a good defender. He might get some blocks, and he might grab some steals occasionally, but off the ball, he's horrific. Harden's horrific too. That's not a factor in this. As far as Harden has a better team argument. So I'm going to go the same route of you trade Harden for Westbrook. You put Harden on the Thunder, and you have Oladipo, Cantor, Adams, Gibson, Robertson, and he turns them into a 50-win team. I have no doubt about that. There's talent on that team. Every NBA prediction in the preseason had the Oklahoma City Thunder having a better record than the Houston Rockets. And you can't just go after the fact and go, oh, the Rockets have a better team now, and not look at what was predicted in the before the season. Eric Gordon, Ryan Anderson, Clint Capella, they've all benefited from what James Harden has done for them in elevating their games. And Westbrook hasn't done that with Oklahoma City. And granted, you can say, oh, he doesn't have as good shooters, but you give Harden the post players that he has in Cantor, Adams, and Gibson, and Harden's going to make something out of that as well, and he's going to make them more a part of their offense. Okay, as far as stats go, okay, he averaged a triple-double. Outstanding accomplishment. I'm not taking anything away from it, and I talked a little bit about this last week, but if you look at the stats, Westbrook is 31 points, 10 assists, 11 rebounds. Harden's 29 points, 11 assists, 8 rebounds. Basically, the difference between the two statistically is 2 points a game and 2 rebounds a game. You're going to say that difference of 2 points and 2 rebounds, you're going to take that over Harden having 8 more wins, the Rockets being a legitimate title contender, where the Thunder have virtually no shot of winning it. You're basically saying you value that. And so that, I mean, it goes back to what Daryl Morey said about winning doesn't matter in basketball anymore in terms of like these types of discussions. And I think it's kind of like in baseball years back before analytics really took over, and you see a pitcher that has 20 wins and you see another starting pitcher with like 18 wins, and you just go, oh, 20-win pitcher, got to give it to him. That's like a threshold. And if you pass the 20-win, you're going to win Cy Young, that sort of deal. And nowadays, like with analytics, it's more like, oh, like who had like better ERA, better WHIP, how did defense account to the ERA and the wins and that sort of thing. And so that 20-win threshold is not a, oh my God, he's got to win sort of deal. And this is what I feel like this MVP is like, oh, he averaged a triple-double, like he's got to win. Like there's no triple-double, like add 15 points and 10 more rebounds and 20 more assists. It's like, that's not even a conversation. And as you guys have already mentioned, switching positions, turning the Rockets into a championship contender. I mean, it's going to be a shame if he loses. And some people are saying, based on just the media hype, that he's probably going to lose. But I mean, shame on the media if that happens. I mean, it's just, I don't know what else you can do if you're Harden and leading the league in assists, being first players in NBA history to 2,000 points, 900 assists, and 600 rebounds. Like, I don't know what else he could do with this team. And the Rockets are better teams, the record, but like, how many more wins could you grab out of this team? Like, this team, fundamentally, there are flaws with it, and that's why they're not like a Golden State or San Antonio level. There are flaws with this team, and what Harden has extracted out in getting 55 wins, I think not much more a player can do. But with that, I want to thank Kevin for coming on and talking about the first round. Playoffs have started today, and they'll continue the first round for the next couple of weeks, and we'll get you on for the second round again. But thanks so much, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you for coming back in, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Let's now go on to the MLB, specifically the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers have gotten some bad news. Beltre has a grade 1 calf strain, so he's going to be out even longer than he was predicted before. I mean, now granted, it's good that our best prospect right now is also a third baseman, but we'll touch on that in a bit. Matt Bush has gotten a cortisone injection, which led to him missing the Los Angeles Angels series. And Cashner is slated to start this Saturday versus the Mariners, but he's going to have a pitch limit of 90. So it's going to be interesting to see how far he can go and how many innings he can pitch, especially considering now that Tyson Ross has back spasms and his expected return date has been pushed back a week before. But now to go back to the Los Angeles Angels series, I mean, we've continued the trend of great offense from this team, but the big news coming out of it is that Joey Gallo has really contributed, and not only is he hitting home runs. I mean, he actually didn't hit any home runs against Los Angeles Angels, but he was able to contribute by getting on base. He has a .346 on-base percentage with a 23.1 strikeout rate. Now, that rate seems bad at first when you look at it, but the fact of the matter is that when he was in the minor leagues, he was averaging between 30 and 40%, like when he would first go to a level, and then after adjusting to the way people were pitching to him, he would usually get around like a 20% strikeout rate. And once he got to a 20% strikeout rate, he'd be like arguably like the best player in the league, no matter where he was at. And so the fact that he's already adjusted to that rate and he's already hit 3 home runs this season, the fact that he's been able to do that has been incredible. And so, I mean, we just got to look out for this guy. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, like, once Adrian Beltre comes back, how we figure out a way to fit him in here. Now, that being said, it's not all sunshine and lollipops for the position players for the Rangers. Shin-Soo Choo, even though he's the designated hitter, he's not exactly been particularly great at hitting, but he has, as always, and has been the continued trend in his career, has been very good at getting on base, and that at the end of the day is what you want to see from someone from going to be at the top of your lineup. It's just someone that can get on base, and especially with the power that this team has, can hopefully be driven in during a home run, or I mean even like a double or a triple, you know. And that's what we, at the end of the day, what we wanted out of Shin-Soo Choo is just someone that can get on base and help set the tone and can get you runs, not necessarily drive in runs, but get you a run. Carlos Gomez and Profar have struggled a little bit this year. I mean, and they were shut down by this past Friday, but that was against King Felix. But I mean, they still have some potential. I mean, like Carlos Gomez, like he at least like hit well that first game of the season, and then just has kind of fallen off a little bit. But that and those two, you hope to see some improvement from. Now, that being said, the starters have actually been very good this year, in spite of the fact that they haven't necessarily been racking up the wins with them starting. I mean, Darvish has been really good. He had, even though he only has like 1 win this season, he's been able to lower his walk rates a little bit, and has actually increased his strikeout rates, which is kind of scary to think about. But the reason this team hasn't won as many games this year as they should have has been because of the bullpen situation, and specifically the closer situation. I mean, Dyson blew a save on Tuesday, and now he's not. He's pretty much lost his spot as the closer for this team. And so what we're gonna be seeing from now on is a closer by committee role. And the problem is that we have each candidate for this spot has their drawbacks. I mean, Matt Bush, as mentioned earlier, had a cortisone injection, and his health is going to be in question, especially since, like, again, he only recently became a pitcher, and last year was the first year that he pitched in an entire regular season. I mean, Trevor Barnett, I mean, he's been great, but I mean, again, he's not only is he a right-handed pitcher, but I mean, he's someone that you want to like be able to bring in, especially to be like a fireman or something like that. But and then you have Jose Leclerc, who actually struck out Trout on 3 pitches on Wednesday and had like a longer than 1 inning save that day. But he's still so young. I mean, he's a rookie. I mean, and granted, the Rangers aren't exactly scared of having a rookie be the closer, as was shown when Neftali Feliz was the closer. But I mean, at the end of the day, like Neftali Feliz was arguably the best was considered the best pitching prospect in all of MLB that season. And not only that, I mean, like, look where he is now. He's not exactly lighting it up now. Another strong candidate that actually has some experience is Jeremy Jeffress, who prior to becoming a Ranger was the closer for the Milwaukee Brewers. But I mean, the problem with Jeffress is that he has some pretty ugly splits against different handed batters. But unfortunately, he might end up being the one that we have to rely on, at least until Sam Dyson at least comes back into some sort of form. But even then, like Dyson, it's going to be a while until Dyson can compete for that position again, just because of like how many opportunities he's blown as closer this year. He only had 1 save, but he had like 4 chances to get a save, and so that's not a good rate. And especially considering how competitive the West is going to be in the AL, you know, we're already looking at a team with a losing record this early in the season. And I mean, you look at how good Houston has been this year, but I mean, it's early enough in the season where the Rangers could conceivably come back. I mean, it's just the question is how this closer by committee role is going to end up being like, and whether or not they feel like they have to go out and trade for someone else to help solidify the bullpen. They finish the Seattle series, and then they go to Oakland, and then they come back home for a game for a series against Kansas City. Let's move on to the Astros. Nathan Kwan, take it away.
Yeah, so the Astros won 3 of 4 since Sunday. They lost the first in Seattle, and then they came back and won that series. They've were down 5-0 in the finale, but then they came back and scored 10 unanswered to win. The bats have really been heating up. So we talked about Jose Altuve and how bad he was the first week of the season. He's raised his batting average to 326 now. This is back to the Altuve of old, which is really good to see. Also, veterans who have been contributing is Carlos Beltran, who Evan was a little wary of his struggles down the stretch last year at the Rangers. He's been good. He's hitting 302 for the Astros. And also Nori Aoki, one of the smaller name signings the Astros got in the offseason. He's contributed, and he's hitting 350 so far this year. So the offense is heating up a bit. As far as pitching, Dallas Keuchel is back to his 2015 Cy Young form. There's no doubt about that. He has a .86 ERA through 3 games. He's back to everything he was in 2015 in locating his pitches. Pitch count is down, very efficient, getting ground balls. And so it's great to see a bounce back year from him. And then in the bullpen, we talked about Chris Davinsky last week. I want to talk about Brad Peacock this week. He's been great in long relief as well. He's pitched 4 of the first 10 games for the team, and he's only allowed 1 hit and 2 walks in 5 2/3 scoreless innings. And so Brad Peacock may be a name in the bullpen that we weren't talking about at the beginning of the year, but he, as well as Chris Davinsky, have really proved invaluable for that team. And right now they're in Oakland. Josh Reddick had his return last night and got a good ovation. They're going to finish up that series, and then they play the Angels, one of the early surprises in the AL West, for a 4-game set next week at home, and then they go out east to Tampa. But let's get to our shout-outs. And so I have 2 shout-outs. First is to Becca Longo. So she became the first woman to land a college football scholarship this past week. She was a kicker for her high school team, and she signed on with a Division II school, Adams State. And so the first woman to get a college football scholarship, great for her. And I think there's that position that you can have a woman on the field. I think kicking and punting would be the 2 primary spots. And so great to see that. Also, David Villa in MLS had an absolute golazo last night in Philadelphia. He had a 50-yard goal where he chipped the keeper. And so David Villa for New York City FC. Go check that out if you haven't.
Definitely, and definitely a shout out to Becca Longo. That's pretty amazing. But another shout out to Ken Hitchcock, who is returning and to become the Dallas Stars head coach, replacing Lindy Ruff. I mean, for those who don't know, Ken Hitchcock was the coach for the Dallas Stars when they won the Stanley Cup back in '99 and almost won it again in 2000. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not he's going to be a good fit for this team now, especially since this is a team that, for the large part, when they were successful, they were one of the best offensive teams out there, and they were very, very fast. And now Ken Hitchcock is known for having a bit of more of a slower, methodical style that emphasizes defense more. So we'll see if maybe that ends up balancing out. I mean, we saw how he was able to help Mike Modano morph into the all-around player that he became and becoming the best player on that Dallas Stars team that won the Stanley Cup. I mean, the big question going forward, obviously, is going to be how does Jim Nill end up helping? I mean, a lot of people were criticizing Jim Nill for his lack of moves that he did this year. But I mean, no offense, but look what we were going up against in terms of just not only were we competing with other people in order to try to get and sign free agents, but I mean, we're also going to have to contend with the expansion draft and losing a few players just to help a new team get some personnel. So now that we're probably not going to have to worry about that going forward for this offseason after the expansion draft happens, now it's going to be interesting to see what he does with this upcoming top 10 overall NHL draft pick, as well as what he can do elsewhere. So yeah, but shout out to Ken Hitchcock. Glad to bring him back on board, and we'll see if he can help turn this team around. Quan, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's it. I wanted you guys to visit our website, twoandeightsonsports.com. Also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And I'll talk to you next week. Enjoy the NBA playoffs.
Yeah, you too, man.